topic that we'll be discussing. First, I will give you an idea of the research that is being done in Thailand right now. Also, specifically at Kasetsart University, their strengths in the research fields. And then also a little bit of history about Elsevier as a company. And then how to get published. I think this is the biggest part of the presentation, and this is hopefully going to be of use to you when you publish for the first time or for the second time in an international journal. So, to give you an idea of the articles published in Thailand, this is going back to 2011, but I think it's a good idea. It gives you a good idea exactly where things are right now. So there's close to 10,000 publications in international journals published in 2011. And of those internationally here, you can see that about 40, and sometimes even in the past, about 50% were collaborated with international authors. So with authors outside of Thailand that you were working with, which is great. Because this is very high, especially when you compare this to countries like the United States, where about 25%, maybe 30% are collaborating with authors outside of the US. Then to look at the cited and uncited documents, after 2 years of publication, about 50% have already been cited. So they have been used in other research by your colleagues, peers around the world. This is terrific. And then the citation and self-citation, you can see that's a little eclectic, I think this is a combination. But after 2 years, you can already see that about 35,000 articles have been cited, and of those, only about 5,000 have been self-citations, so citations that the author made to his or her own work. It's also terrific. Technology is not working for me right now. Sorry about that. So, breakdown of sub-areas that are currently being researched in Thailand. You see, it's a very nice division of all the different areas that all of your colleagues in different universities in Thailand publish in. Of course, here you can see that there's a huge area which is physical sciences that is very well represented. And if you look at Kasetsart University, this is something that I pulled out of Cyber, which is, I think, a tool that you have available for you at the university as well. You can see that if you look at the ring, all the different research areas are represented, and then the bubbles, these big bubbles, represent the strengths of the university. The bigger the bubble, the more, the stronger you are in this area. So the more the bubble goes into the center, the more interdisciplinary the bubble is. So it interacts with other research areas. You can see here chemistry is very strong in the biology and biotechnology, and also social sciences, which is, has a couple of very, very strong areas as well. And to look at one of the competencies, this is distinct competency 1, so this is something that is you are very good at right now. And this is, of course, in chemistry area, food chemistry in particular. And one of the authors, and maybe this author is here today, I don't know. Professor Schiewart. He or she has actually published 8 articles in this area. And you can see that these are some of the key terms used to describe this research, this particular piece of research. And it's on starch in this case. So, some history about Elsevier. Originally a company that started in 1580, but of course at this time it was a company that was simply printing books, and they might be printing 3 to 4 textbooks a year, but by very important authors at the time. So Galileo, I think, is one of the texts that is used in a lot of research areas, and it's very close to my heart because it's also mathematics. It was based in Leiden, which is a small university town in the Netherlands. And then you think, well, where do we go from there? Well, the company now is situated all around the world. It has an office, major offices in New York, in Amsterdam, in Oxford, but also subsidiary offices in Beijing, in Singapore, even, I believe, in Rio de Janeiro, so it's very exotic places. And this is an example of all the different journals that we publish. It says here 2,000 plus journals. Well, it's about 2,500 now, so it's growing rapidly. And they're in all the different fields of science. I'm sure you recognize some of these titles. This gives you an idea of what a publisher does, and not just Elsevier, but any academic publisher in the world. As a publisher, we make sure that, of course, for each journal, an international strong editorial board is organized of editors that represents that particular field represented in that journal. We make sure that the editors, alongside ourselves as publishers, solicit and manage the submissions that come in. And I should mention that about 1 million submissions come in every year to Elsevier journals. So it is a large and very complex process to make sure that each author gets the benefits of submitting to Elsevier journal. Then, of course, we make sure that we manage the peer review process and make sure that the articles go out to colleagues of yours around the world to evaluate whether the research in your article is of a particular interest to that field and of good quality. Once that is, if that is true, and I would say out of the 1 million submissions, about between 40 and 80%, depending on the journal you submit to, are rejected. So they are not accepted to the journal. But if you are lucky and you do get accepted, then you go into the stage of editing and making sure that the copy of your article is in perfect condition before it goes into the production process, and then it is published in, of course, a database like Science Direct, but of course also in the printed version of the journal. And last but not least, archiving, which is very important, of course, so that colleagues of yours will be able to see your article and find it easily, in a couple of 50 years, 100 years, 200 years, depending on the value of your research. But everything is archived. This gives you an idea of the market share of Elsevier versus the other publishing companies in the world. And it doesn't go into great detail here, but we compete with Wilder Blackwell, with Springer, and then you get smaller, also specialized publishers, including society publishers. And this breaks down into all these areas. So you can see that life and health sciences are very strong in the industry, but all the other areas are also very well represented. researchers in the world as well. Some trends in publishing. So from something that I was doing back in 1997, it was the printed version of the journal that was important. So each issue was printed, and then some of them were digitally available, but the majority was not. We've moved on very rapidly from there, and so now 95% of all the materials that we have are electronically available. The small majority that isn't, the 5% that's missing here, is sometimes books, especially old books that might not be of so much interest anymore to a large audience, so they're not digitized, but the majority of the books are in fact, so that would make the additional 5%. Given that you have electronic access to all the journals, it is much easier, of course, to share the information. Whereas before it was just one copy that everybody had to take out of the library and read and possibly photocopy and then give back. But it was very inefficient. Nowadays, of course, you can all look at the same issue or same article at the same time. If it were 50 people or 100 people, 2,000 people, it makes no difference because it's electronically available. It's very different. Also, electronic submissions. This is a much easier way of submitting your article. I can see that there's a lot of very young people here, so I'm sure you would not know what it was like to first submit your paper to a journal. You have 3 copies of your paper sent to this journal in the mail, and then you hope that it will arrive. And if it arrives, then the editor, of course, looks at this, and maybe after a couple of months you would hear about whether he had received it or not. Well, with electronic submissions, of course, it's much more efficient. You as an author can also track which position your manuscript is at. So whether it's already with a handling editor or with a reviewer, you can check this through the electronic submission system. And of course there's the experimental publishing models, including open access. It's been around for, probably been around for about 5 years, although there's some experiments 10 years, 15 years ago, and it's something that the company takes very seriously because it looks at all the different models and how you as authors and you as researchers want to use research in general. These are some of the open access journals we already publish, and this is rapidly growing every day. Of course, there's also a large group of journals, 1,600 titles, where we have a combination. We say to those authors that want to publish open access or have to publish open access, this is available to you, but we still have the traditional library purchasing the subscriptions. Therefore, anybody can submit to this journal and anybody can get accepted to this journal. So it's an inclusive and not an exclusive way of proposition. There's also the delayed open access journals where there's a delay between 6 to 48 months, depending on the field, so that after this it is available for all researchers to access and use the materials. So now we get into more of the details of how you can get how you can submit, but also how you can research your the references correctly and so forth. And then while you're writing your paper, what you have to think about, all the different steps of the process. So research. A lot of people say, oh, I go to Google, I type in some keywords, I get a list of articles that I think are relevant, and I just reference those. Well, there is a little bit more than Google around, I would say. It's very important to know exactly what is available from your university, and you have access to pretty much everything that I can think of that would make your research the best possible research that you can do. Not only the experiments or the actual research you have done for yourself, but also to see what has already been published out there. Because it's very important to know that you're the first person doing this. If this has already been done by somebody 5 years ago, then maybe you should reevaluate whether you want to do this at all. So you want to make sure that the ideas you have are original ideas. And to do this, you have to make sure that you access the right resources. Through your library, through your university, and possibly through Google or another search engine as well. Or specifically, some tools, databases that you might have in your specific field. I won't get into this because there's so many different ones. Some practical advice. This is, I think, a nice list of all the sites that you can access in order to look at what is hot, what is new, what is being done by your colleagues around the world. The trends, because of course some people might be interested in cutting-edge research, others might actually be looking at specific areas where research has been done in the past and they want to enhance that. So it all depends on where you want to, what you want to do with your research. Then evaluating the sources that you are using. So making sure that you look at some of the metrics, some of the ways to measure whether the source that you are using is a high-level journal or a somewhat more regional journal. And of course, you can also find a lot about what the journal has been published in the past and what this journal particularly looks at. For example, if you are either doing the research for with those articles of the journal, or if you're thinking of publishing that journal. And I will get into more details about this later. So, just a reminder of how you find your peers and how your peers find you. This is a person at the university here that I looked up. And you can see that this person has 60 documents that have been identified as that belonging to that person. And of those 60 documents, 1,025 references were created. So incredible. That's a really well cited person, if you will. And you can see that there's a couple of names that are being used for the same person, but only a couple. This tends to be a problem when you look at somebody that might publish under her maiden name first and then publish under the married name later. Then you want to make sure, actually as a researcher, that you always use the same name so that people can easily find you and that you get the credit also for those references that are made to your research. And some people will say, oh yeah, I first use my full name, first full name, or sometimes they abbreviate it. Well, make sure that you always have the same standard, because it's much easier for your peers to find that this is in fact Professor Schierot at Kazachstan University. And forgive me my pronunciation. So, Elsevier and quite a few other publishing companies have been thinking how to improve on this. How to make sure that you identify the right author and you as author get all the credits to your work. So there's Project Orchid, and it makes sure that it looks at all the different ways of consolidating your research and your name into one ID, basically. So it looks at first, and this is from Scopus, but this is also done by other publishers. In this case, Jacob Smith, and Jacob Smith's ID is currently especially Smith is a very common name, of course, in English-speaking countries, so he's not very unique in his way. Jacob Smith then accesses the ORCID site from Scopus and looks at all the publications that are credited to his name right now. Of course, these publications can be not his at all, but they can be from another Jacob Smith. So he has to make sure that the publications are correct, and maybe some publications are missing from this list, so he also has to add publications. And then finally, he receives a unique ID in ORCID, and he can use this, and he can always say, oh, this is me, this is exactly who I am, and these are all the different research articles that are credited to my name, and I can make sure that everybody sees this as well. Now we get into some metrics. The H-index. H-index is something that is, you might be familiar with. It looks at the number of citations versus the number of papers an author has published, so it's also specific to one author. And then it takes the median. So let's assume this author has published 20 papers, and the median of his or her work is 10 citations, although maybe some of these papers were cited 50 times, then his or her H-index is 10. There is the impact factor. I'm sure you're quite familiar with this. This is more specific to, of course, journals. It calculates the number of citations versus the number of articles published in 2 years. So let's assume that a journal publishes 100 articles in year 1 and 100 articles in year 2. And of those articles, 100 citations come out, then the impact factor is 0.5. It's very simple. In different areas, the impact factor is very different. So this is just an average. Fundamental life sciences, you can see that the average impact factor is about 3. And I would actually say this is a very conservative number. In mathematics and computer science, where I work in, 0.5 is the average impact factor. So you have to compare within each field in your research area. You can compare the journals against each other. I don't think it would be fair to compare, for example, a math journal versus a fundamental life science journal and say, oh, this math journal is not doing very well. It depends on the type of research that you're working on. Of course, there's other metrics that you can use, SGR and SNP. SGR was developed by Scimago, and Scimago is a website I would advise you to look at because it gives you a lot of information, including some of the information I already used in this presentation about the country, how the country of Thailand is doing in its research areas and so forth. But Scimago has created a journal ranking as well, and it looks at more at the prestige of the journal. So if this journal, let's say Nature, for example, is a very prestigious journal, it would be ranked much higher than, let's say, the European Journal of Regional Biology, for example. It has a different impact. Therefore, the citations, of course, of that journal also weigh much higher. SNP, Source Normalized Impact per Paper. It's more in the context of looks at the context for information. So it also looks at your area of research specifically and compares the journal amongst each other instead of saying, oh well, let's say biology, it will only look at the biology journals and it will not evaluate any other journals. This is a slide from Scopus, which shows that in this area, analytics, up here, you can click on here, and you can actually take a couple of your journals that you want to analyze against each other, and you can compare them with SGR or SNP for the percentage of non-cited papers, for example, or citations. And you can see that you can find the trends in there. I think this is more, it's not so much for students to look at, but it's more for administrators, but also professors to look at and see what would be suited better for them and how they're doing against each other in the market. And then this is another slide that shows exactly what it would look like if you're looking at non-cited articles. Of course, in the first or second year, a lot of articles are not cited, which is obvious because it takes some time for the research that is using these articles to actually be published as well. Now, if you compare the different ratings and the different metrics, you see that Cell, in this case, is rated second in impact factor, second in SGR, but then first in SNP. The SNP, of course, looks at only those journals relevant to Cell. It's a nice way of comparing. I want you to think about the reasons that you want to publish. Why are you trying to get your research published in an international journal? You have, of course, very personal reasons. You want perhaps to get funding or because you're doing your PhD. But the most important thing is to remember that if you are doing this, you first want to be validated. Your research needs to be looked at by peers around the world to see if it is relevant to what the rest of the field is doing. So if 2 or 3 or 4 reviewers and the editors say, yes, this is great research, this is what we want to see in that research area, then it's the validation you receive to get published is wonderful because you know that you're doing the right thing. Of course, you also want to make sure that when it is published, that it's archived, that, as I said before, 50 years down the road, you can still find your research somewhere, and you can still use this research. Now, I realize that for some areas, it's very rapid publication, and it's very rapid research, and something that was done maybe 2 years ago is already outdated. However, in other areas, a lot of the physical science, I would say, research that was done 10, 20, 30 years ago is still being used right now as a foundation for what you're doing. So it's very important. Having said that, you might have this idea, but the editors and the reviewers that you are sending this paper to have no idea why you're actually submitting your article, what your personal reasons are for publishing. A tip I would give is if you're a young researcher and you do need to get your PhD or your postdoc, make sure that the editor knows, because then he or she might be quicker to respond to your request and put it through the process quicker than if it were a more senior researcher. Because a more senior researcher doesn't have this need to publish quickly in order to get his or her degree. And do keep in mind, your paper is your passport. So what you are you're about to publish and what you have sent out into the community is who you are. This is your identity, if you will. So keep that in mind. And with that, I think I want to pause for a moment, because the rest, we can have a break now. And then afterwards, we will get into the process and all the different stages of setting up your paper in the right order. Thank you.
Shall we take a break for 20 minutes? And anybody who needs a paper for question, please contact our registration and